Okay, well, welcome everyone to this One Nucleus session around reducing carbon footprint. And I mean, I think that means the race to net zero is used an awful lot, but just racing to offset things doesn't feel like it's the long-term solution if we just buy our way out of trouble other ways and offset. But from One Nucleus perspective, doing these sessions, it fits with us for how we want to engage with our member organizations, really. It's around how can we enable them through peer-to-peer learning and opportunities to see what others are doing to be the best organizations they can be. And as much as we want every company to be as successful and as competitive as they can be globally as a member of ours, I think a lot of that starts out as being what's the best version of yourself you can be by sharing information locally, and then you can go out and compete with anyone. So when it comes to carbon footprints or ESG generally, we hear more and more about, I guess, what used to be quite often termed it was a CSR agenda. But obviously there's overlaps and it comes forward into ESG where you have the environmental, social and governance issues. And today, obviously with the title, is very much about the environmental side of things. And I guess I tend to think of how do we get better treatments to patients in a fairly holistic way, because we're not going to end up developing better treatments if we don't do great research and basic research that can be translated. We need translational companies like PetMedix, which we'll hear about more, I'm sure, as we go from Yoko, who take that scientific discovery and start translating that into treatments and pets or humans and what the company's doing. But within that, we also need the business side to function. So, I grew up in the 70s and 80s with British Airways telling me, you only win deals if you take a plane of ours and travel to the meeting and close the deal. You can't do it remotely. Well, lots of deals have been closed remotely in the last 18 months. So maybe British Airways were not telling me the full truth. Or maybe we've just changed because we had to. And equally then, how do we function day to day as a business? We need to procure things for our offices and the way we function and communicate and use our technology, and right down to the desk I'm leaning on right now. So we have that perspective. And then you have the larger companies like Saviva, and I'm glad we have Mina on the call with us. Because again, as a provider into the research sector and as a large corporate, they straddle these camps and see things from different angles of what's doable. And I'd like to think, I'd mentioned it with the panelists as we were just gathering, a couple of decades back when the green agenda was coming up and companies started to see themselves as the green credentials being a differentiator. I don't think we're at the same place now. I think being in more environmentally friendly and corporate and social responsibility becomes the norm and is increasingly the norm, because it's not just the investment markets and analysts that are demanding that. Actually, it's talent and customers and partners are wanting to see that too. So there's a lot of brand value tied up in this, but I don't think it's the differentiator. It's just how do we share and provoke good questions, and how do we look at good practice that is going on in order to encourage other people to adopt it. And today we'll maybe get to discussing some of that best practice from amongst the panelists, and then have some consideration around what are some of the barriers or how can we incentivize more. So to start off with, I'm delighted we have the panel we have. It's very diverse and an expert in these matters, but I think it's far better if you hear from them as their introductions rather than me. So from that perspective, perhaps I can come to Joe first, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and with that maybe also share some of the best practice and what's going on inside your organization that you feel most proud of.
Hi everybody, my name's Jo Durgan. I'm a senior postdoc at the Babraham Institute, where my regular research is focused on autophagy, so recycling inside of the cell. I also have a parallel role chairing our Green Lab sustainability work at Babraham Institute, which really grew out of a personal concern of my own about the environment. With the climate crisis and other ecological issues, we're facing probably the biggest problem that humanity's ever faced. And yet we're not dealing with it with the urgency that's required still. And I feel that we scientists are really well placed to understand the data and the problem and also the solutions. And so I feel a big sense of responsibility to my kids and to everybody else in their generation to try to take some action and pass on a healthy world to them. So my way into this was a training event run by the Climate Reality Project a few years ago, where it's run by Al Gore and it's delivered by really world-class environmental scientists. And they encourage people to, from all different walks of life, to learn about climate change and its solutions, and then go back to your particular community and take whatever action you can. And so the action that I decided to focus on was in my workplace, developing this sustainability green lab scheme at Babraham Institute. Because research by necessity is a very energy and resource intensive endeavour, but there are lots of opportunities to make improvements that happen then at quite a large scale with a big environmental impact, but also importantly, in lots of cases, it saves you money as well. So it's a kind of win-win. And so some of the examples that we have already at Babraham relate to lots of different areas. So energy efficiency is one important area to think about. So we have a trigeneration system that combines cooling, heat and power, and so significantly reduces the amount of energy we use, which also significantly reduces energy bills. We've also, on a more lab-based level, undertaken a shift of setting our -80s to -70, which by and large is absolutely fine in terms of sample integrity and saves an awful lot of energy. We also have lots of actions focused around waste. We do a lot of recycling and even composting of organic waste from the animal house, which can then be used to fertilise the surrounding estate at the Babraham Research Campus. We're trying to think increasingly about transport. So we have a subsidised bus pass for all of the staff members. And we're starting to think more about reducing our conference flights and offsetting where that's unavoidable. And again, thinking about the nice estate that the Babraham Institute sits on, we're also really keen to think about supporting nature and biodiversity. And we had a really nice event pre-pandemic where we planted 1,000 new native hedge plants with the kids from the local primary school. So that was a nice engagement opportunity as well. And I think probably from our perspective, what's really key is that we need to think about all of these diversity of areas which touch on our research, but also our other activities around campus to really think about the kind of overall carbon footprint of both our work and our life on campus.
Thanks, Jo. I think that sets the tone pretty well, actually, for just how broad an application this topic is. I think there's so many different aspects to it. Perhaps I'll come to Neil and Zoe next from Harts as a preferred supplier of One Nucleus to our members. If you could just introduce yourselves a little bit, and again, what are you proud of within Harts?
So yeah, I'm Zoe. I work with Neil in the Saffron Walden office, actually based in Saffron Walden as well, which is quite nice. I think I mentioned earlier, mum to a teenage daughter. So for me, I'm really passionate about making it a better place for her to live as she grows up. You know, the news, especially over the last couple of years, has been really quite powerful in a negative way about climate change. Yeah, so for me, personal and business-wise, it's really making it a better place for her to live.
Yeah, hi, I'm Neil Wilder. Likewise, I have two daughters that live in London, and obviously that is a major motivation for me, and obviously horrendous images that we see and what's happening around the world. If that's not a wake-up call, then I really don't know what is. As a business, I'm quite proud that we're part of a group now that has a CSR director. And we have a business commitment to be zero emission logistics platform by the end of 2023. We've started this process already. We have introduced electric vans into London, which has been very successful and is obviously reducing on emissions. Taking Joe's point earlier regarding travel and so forth. We have a staggered purchasing process that's already in place for the rest of our fleet of vans, which will result at the end of 2023, excuse me, I keep looking at my notes, we'll have 6 Tesla trucks. So that will enable us to deliver an almost nationwide delivery process that will be electric. We don't know of any competitors that have that. We also have renewable energy for all our sites. But part of the process for us really is, and this has proved very successful in London as well, is introducing the platform where our partners, clients, whatever you call them, can almost, the old-fashioned saying, a one-stop shop. But by doing that, they can all come on one van, and obviously reduces the amount of deliveries that are going in by couriers. So it's huge. It really is huge, and something that we're very, very proud of, and it's working well. So that will be introduced throughout the business. I can't give you a date yet for the electric vans that come into our region, but they are on order. It's just a process that we have to go through as such. And some of the remarks from the London customers they've been very pleased with the reduction of packaging of the deliveries. I won't mention any names, but obviously, you know, we recycle boxes and so forth along those lines. So basically, what we're doing then is sort of having a management chat with these clients and just letting them know what the range is that we do. So, for example, we have office supplies, which includes a green range, and it's one of those equations where, if I'm brutally honest, it's price related, and we're getting to that balance now where it's been introduced and people are accepting it. Going back to, as you said, 2 years ago, the buzzword, but then the price inhibited it. Now we're overcoming that. So we also offer print, catering. We offer a fair trade range within that range as well. Consumables, i.e. cartridges. So that's a bit of a double-edged sword, because obviously you want to encourage recycled cartridges, but you need to recycle cartridges to get recycled cartridges. So basically what we have is we cater for both, but we also put recycling boxes into our clients. So they will be taken away, recycled at no cost, and you know that they're not being fly tipped or whatever. We also offer a canteen janitorial range and office interiors as well. So basically all coming on one van, one delivery, and it's just cutting down on the cost of delivery, but also what it's doing to the planet as well. We're also looking at our supplier chain, because obviously if we're doing this, we're expecting our suppliers to do this. This is not going to happen overnight, but to give a couple of examples, we use Senator, a furniture supplier, has a huge recycling plant, and they recycle, and that heats their factory and their water, so all wastage. And likewise, our paper supplier, Navigator, has no wastage at all. Everything is put into the plant as such, really. So we see this as a business as a starting point, and we're constantly looking at ways to improve it. Be it green products, we're introducing new methods. So at the moment, we're looking at shredding as well within house. So these are the sort of things. We currently do a low profile one where we supply bags at a low cost, we collect them and then recycle that. But we're also looking at putting big boxes in where we can collect and so forth and whatever. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's basically where we are. We want to introduce this to people, and basically just offer an online program, which is paper free, obviously, and we can cater for all their needs, which obviously is beneficial to us. But likewise, if we're delivering it on one electric van, then it's beneficial to the planet as well. And from our clients in London, the majority of them, I'm not going to say everyone, is they've been quite surprised that it's been cost neutral as well. But we're also, to me, with my business head on, and also my green head, it makes sense. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. First of all, come to Yoko next.
Hi, my name is Yoko Shibata, and I'm a senior scientist at PetMedix. PetMedix is a small startup biotech company of about 40 to 45 people. We develop antibody medicine in the animal health field. And my role involves planning and day-to-day operation of some protein expression, but mainly purification, characterization, and developability assessments of our candidate antibodies for R&D and preclinical purposes. So as biotech and pharma industry as a whole, we use a huge amount of single-use sterile plastics. In fact, I have to look at the note for the right number. Our sector is one of the more hidden, but a particularly high volume offender of producing plastic waste. In a study done in 2015 at the University of Exeter, they estimated that the biomedical and agricultural labs worldwide could produce 5.5 million tons of plastic waste a year, which is equal to about 83% of recycled plastic worldwide in 2012. That means that what we do is basically negating the entire world effort of plastic recycling. Those images of plastic waste, islands in the ocean, as well as the story about the wildlife being harmed by our plastic waste really hit me hard and made me decide to do something about it to reduce it. So I've met Joe online over the network while I was still in Grand Park, right before we actually entered the lockdown. And she was the one who introduced me to the Climate Reality Project. And I was trained by that to become one of the leaders last year virtually. Since joining the PetMedix last year at Babraham, we are taking full advantage of the waste stream initiative they have on campus at Babraham. Joe explained about it a little bit, but Babraham has 100% non-landfill policy and provide us with many easy ways of recycling, from food, the bottles, the cardboard and paper, clean plastics, and polystyrene, which is usually very difficult to recycle elsewhere. So as a small company, the first step we took was to create the clear signposts and bins so that everybody in the lab can do his or her part. Our goal now is we strive to reach 100% recycling of the recyclable materials. This year, we planted a tree for each member of the company on the Earth Day. We had team days on Babraham campus, planting new trees and flowers, and we are joining the Green Impact Scheme this year, along with Babraham Institute. So I'm really looking forward to that. That give us more momentum to do more of it. But overall, we really believe that we cannot care for our beloved animals, whether it's domesticated pets or wild, without caring for the environment as a whole. So that sort of where we are.
Thanks, Yoko. I guess, Mina, if I can come to you, I know technology means you're having to leave your camera off, but it'd be great to hear from you as someone who sort of services these R&D companies, large and small, and academic institutes, etc. Where Saviva fit in this agenda?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me along. I really appreciate it. And Saviva, for those of you who are unaware of who we are, we used to be Pharmacia, Amersham Biosciences, got taken over by GE Life Sciences, and then GE sold us to the Danaher Corporation last year, so during the pandemic, so we haven't been able to go out and do our branding, but we are now the life science division alone, and we sit as a standalone company called Saviva. And I'm sad to say that we are a massive offender of the production of single-use plastic waste, which is tragic because we're doing our best to make sure that we want to commit and work with each other for sustainability. Sustainability is a big, massive area within Saviva itself. However, unfortunately, with the work and the life that we are working in terms of the industry we're working in, particularly with bioprocess manufacturing, delivering therapeutics for drug deliveries, it requires single-use plastics. And this has been a biggest, massive issue for us. So our commitment to sustainability is thriving people, a thriving planet, and a thriving business. And these are our three aims that are deeply connected. So achieving them is our ambition, and it's also our responsibility. And so that's why we are committing to integrating respect for people and the care of our environment in decisions in ways that have a lasting impact on our society, on our customers, patients, and also all of our Saviva associates. So what we're committing to is designing in an environmental and social priorities, high ethical standards throughout our operations and within our strategy. We take seriously the effects of our decision-making and business activities on the people and the planet. We're working systematically to reduce the negative impacts on our own operations and also along our own value chain. So what we've started to do is do a lot of shipments taking away the plastic in the shipments and packaging, replacing that with a lot of recyclable materials. So all our boxing and all the so forth is filled with anything that can be recycled. We're also working with a company that's based in the UK, which I've spoken to with Yoko at PetMedix as well. So Yoko's the lady that's kindly introduced me to Tony to get me on board in terms of working within the area to promote this company. And they're a company called Reworked. And what they're actually doing is trying to work with companies to recycle any form of plastic waste. And this can be any biological hazard material that can be also used to be recycled as well. So when I say we're partnering them, we're nothing to do with them, they're an independent company, but I'm trying to get them introduced to areas where they can take them on site and actually implement and take your waste away from you. So the biggest issue in the life science sector, and especially within biological research, is the fact that as soon as you've used any single-use plastic for any biological hazardous waste, it cannot be recycled. Whereas Reworked, what they're doing is they take the plastic, they clean it, they dispose of it, and what they're actually doing is remaking like plastic pellets and things like that as well. So they're not actually burning it and getting rid of it, they're actually breaking it down and remolding it into useful plasticware whereby removing the fact that it's sitting in landfills and that kind of stuff. So we're really keen to have them work with you guys and have them in place. Like I said, it's got no incentive based on us, it's just our commitment to the scientific research industry to allow people to be aware of these companies that are out there to make sure that we have a greener footprint by helping you guys as well. Because whilst we are working on an alternative to single-use plastic, it's a very slow area because obviously, as people might know, in manufacturing, it's difficult to basically just swap out a bit of plastic. It requires a lot of testing, a lot of QA. And so for that reason, it's taking a lot longer than we all anticipated. So yeah, so that's where we are. We endorse the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as well. So we're part of that. We're really keen to contribute to achieving them through our operations and also working together with others. And that's where the company Eve is called Reworked. That's RE and then capital WORKED. And if you are interested in them, I'm keen to get them, as Tony and Yoko both know, I'm keen to get them onto the Babraham site as a whole. We're looking for as many people to sign up to them, and I think it is a cost, obviously, in terms of for the site as a whole to use Reworked. But I think Saviva offer you a discount to enable you to work with Reworked as well. And Tony can pass on my details to whoever's interested, and I can actually get Reworked to come in and give a presentation and speak to you guys directly, so they know. So you can all your questions that you want answered, they can actually answer them for you. Oh, thank you. I'm the baddie, but also the goodie.
but I think it's really important within any of this which has come through really in this, there's an awful lot of passion and personal commitment within this at individual levels and then the ethos within companies. But equally, I think it doesn't need to be sacrificing, if you like, the bottom line and the economics to be greener. I think it makes often very good sense to be greener. There's a reason why pharma companies, when they're manufacturing, would like green chemistry, because disposing of solvents is really expensive. So, there's a direct link through here. And we don't, unfortunately, a man from Grey Doors Group, who was due to come on the panel, hasn't been able to join us, but we work with them as a travel management company, to help people evaluate what are the options around when they do need to fly for business. And they link into some sustainability projects. I think they have one called Legacy, which they've teamed in with a family group up in Scotland with lots of land, and they're planting trees to help people offset some of the things they have to do. But I think one of the things, I think, Joe, you mentioned about, thinking about, well, when do we travel to conferences or trips like that? And that's, the same for researchers. Everyone likes to get together and share those ideas. It's how innovation happens and progress. We've had a year and a half of sharing all this online. So if I'm just sort of interested in what triggers change. And okay, the pandemic is so disruptive, it probably resets the clock on lots of things and the opportunity to change. But for you as a research scientist in the lab and with your colleagues, do you feel what's the negative of not being able to travel compared to doing it online? And how do you help others find that balance?
Specifically for conference travel, you mean? Yeah, so I think that there's definitely pros and cons to traveling in person and meeting online. And I think probably you have to think about it on a case-by-case basis. What I would suggest is that maybe rather than going in person by default and racking up a lot of conference flights every year, we should all kind of set ourselves some kind of air miles quota and really prioritize the most important meeting to go to in person, and by all means do that and offset it. But then look at opportunities for doing some of what we used to do in person virtually instead, because one of the good things about the pandemic has been that it's taught us that is actually very achievable. So I think it's about striking that balance. I don't think we have to be totally black and white and eliminate all flights, but I do think we need to reflect on the fact that for most of us as individuals, flying is probably the highest emitting activity that we do. And so, reducing that does have kind of tangible benefits. And I was looking up the stats on conference impact, and there was a Nature paper recently where they had estimated the impact of one of the big scientific meetings, and they calculated that the 28,000 people who had traveled to this meeting and back had the distance that they traveled was further than the distance between the Earth and the Sun to go to one meeting. And the amount that they had emitted collectively was equal to the entire city of Edinburgh for the week that they were there. And I think it's hard to justify doing that on a regular basis. So
that is quite phenomenal, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think, we have to be mindful of the impact, but I think there's ways to strike a balance. There's opportunities for hybrid meetings that maybe can find some middle ground where some people travel and some people join remotely. And that tackles lots of other issues as well, because, travel is expensive and that prohibits inclusivity. So I think exploring online options sometimes has many other benefits also.
I think I've sort of heard that sort of approach, it's a kind of companies maybe coming back with a virtual first approach. Say, actually, can we do this virtually? If we can't, we will travel. But maybe we're going to send one person rather than three to go and do this meeting. And I guess, because I'm of a number of years, I guess I've sort of grown up in that culture of you kind of, if an investor is going to give you money or a customer is going to give you a contract, they want to see the whites of your eyes and they build up trust that way. But maybe that's in an era when technology online wasn't as good as it is now. I guess many of us of that era have been on conference calls, even with the telephone, where people are dropping in and out because it never really worked. So video conferencing was an absolute nightmare, but actually it's kept us going through this pandemic. But and that's sort of the academic issue. But Yoko, from a smaller biotech type company, I guess if Tom was on the call as chief exec and he needs to meet investors all the time as the next round of funding, how do we instigate change in those behaviors?
Well, they have achieved that all virtually the past year, so it's achievable. And we even made the video of the lab tour to send to those investors. So,
but I think it actually, for me, we hadn't rehearsed this, but that was like the perfect answer, because the only way to convince people is to show you can do it, and there's nothing like evidence to say, you know what, this works.
Yes,
but I guess I suppose where I wanted to go with it, and this is open to anyone who wants to chip in, but are there things one Nucleus could be doing to help others instigate that change and grow the amount of changing behavior?
I think an organization like One Nucleus has a power to address to large number of people, not large number of companies. And you have the power to connect and discuss and argue and whatever, bring everybody together so that there was a discussion, there will be agreement, disagreement, cons and pros and everything put on the table. And then we can decide what is right for each setting of this, large or small companies and that sort of thing. And even if the smallest thing, I know we haven't done huge amount because we are small company, and we can't, like one of the questions you put out for in the email saying that there's no way we can buy a warehouse and buy all the product ahead of time in store so that we don't have to have the multiple delivery. That's not going to be possibility for us. But that doesn't mean that we are not putting effort or trying to lessen the number of the delivery coming through by collectively ordering things, for example, or using the campus store for some of the smaller items, we need small quantity of that sort of thing. And I think it is the education, the conversation will become the education of people, change the mindset, the behavior. And I think that's the important part of your organization to sort of coordinate.
Okay, thanks. I mean, I guess leading on from that, and I think, Mina, you touched upon it, and then if I come to you and then perhaps on to Neil and Zoe from a supply chain side, you said there was a cost implication, if you like, for Reworked to come on site to a campus or for companies to engage. How do you counter that? How do you bring them on board? Is the let's be better at reducing carbon and environmentally better sufficient argument, or are there more things we could throw to the mix?
I think the cost side of things it's unfortunate, I think it is, but I think it has to be, I can see, because obviously Reworked have to collect, and then so they've got their costs that they have to run as a company as a way, even though they're doing something really good by taking away this used plasticware. So they've got obviously their trucks that they need to come in and collect and then bring it to the site and then pay the workers in order to, so that's the reason why there's a potential cost implication. To what that cost is, I'm not sure, but I just think in terms of if that's just a little bit that we can pay our way to make the environment better, then it's sometimes a little bit of a sacrifice that we're willing to take. I mean, if anything showed us through the pandemic, by the world stopping, the world kind of became cleaner and greener. The rivers in Venice cleared up. There were fish appearing in places where they'd never appeared for ages before, and that's just because we stopped doing all the nasty things that we do on a day-to-day basis. And I do think one action can make a difference.
And I guess that's kind of what I hope from a One Nucleus perspective, is conversations like this start to bring out both the evidence, because that's always the most convincing thing you can do on people, leading by example, but
Yeah.
also sort of explaining what this deal is with the environment. You know, we have a responsibility to look after it. But Neil, again, you know, you touched upon some of the greener or greening initiatives, if you like. You can phrase them like that in terms of your product portfolio.
Candice to Zoe.
Hi, I'm going to take over.
I'm sort of intrigued or interested to hear how that kind of conversation plays out. You know, what's the barrier to getting beyond that?
Yeah, for us, I mean, I've been doing this for probably more years than what I want to say online. And we've always had the conversation about the green aspect of the product range that we can offer. And up until probably about 10, 15 years ago, there was quite a price premium on that. So if we were going in with some pricing on your standard stationary range, and then we'd been asked to quote on an eco or a green range, you know, the price comparison was quite a bit different. Thankfully, a lot of the manufacturers now have started to look at this as the norm. So when we're quoting on predominantly the stationary side of things, that price premium now is minimal. You know, and unfortunately, back it's like 10, 15 years ago, when we were going in with that eco range and the predominantly the FDs or the CFOs were looking at the price difference and saying, we just can't warrant it. We now have the strong story behind us that it's a minimal price increase, and also all of the manufacturers we deal with come with their environmental policies, which we can take in as well, and their story about what they're doing. So from us, we have a lot of ammunition, especially from, you know, the paper merchants, the navigators, the Xerox, the big players, which we can literally come in with portfolios of information. So I think everyone nowadays, when they're looking at the products they're purchasing, they want to know that the story behind it. And I think that's really moved on over the last couple of years, and even more so in the last probably 18 months. I think it's given time for people to stop and reflect a little bit about what they're doing at home and also what they're doing in the work. You know, furniture side of things, everything now can be recycled. So we can take the chairs away and the components are broken up. Desking exactly the same, whether it's wood, whether it's the steel, whether it's MDF, whether it's the rubber. All of this can now be recycled. And I think Neil touched on Senator, which is one of the UK's leading furniture manufacturers. Their whole recycling plant actually powers their furniture manufacturing plant because of their recycling processes. So for me personally, it's really important that we have those stories behind the products that we're selling.
It's an interesting point, isn't it? Because often there is the data and there is the kind of financial balance, but actually that's becoming much more cost neutral, if you like, in many of these settings.
Yeah.
But it also takes the right story behind some of these things for people to pay attention. And I think we see some of the biggest differences when there is a figurehead or a champion that takes people on this journey and think, oh, you know, actually I could do that. And I'm keen to understand that there's lots of, obviously our sector is by number of companies is very SME rather than large corporate, when you just one for one company to company, even though the impacts are very different. And then the Institute, I look at the Babraham Research Campus, which I think is making huge strides down this track, probably because of you ladies on the call here that are poking them to go down this track as well. But it's kind of those larger institutions, but how we can plug the smaller companies into that infrastructure so that it can work better. Now, whether that best way is at a campus level, but not all companies are on a research campus with an academic institute behind them. I don't know whether there's anything on the supply chain side, and again, this could be a Harts or a Saviva question. Is there anything there that allows sort of a larger company to buddy a smaller company through so that they could say, well, you could tag yourselves onto our program? Do you know if there's any systems like that?
Yeah.
It's not something that I mean, we tend to speak to clients individually to work out what their needs are. I've been to quite a few companies in London and done sort of audits with them. And that tends to work really well because we can actually understand what it is that they require from us. And so from our side of the fence, it would be more of a client by client audit process and presentation.
Well, we have obviously the one Nucleus network, so regardless of size and so forth, we can do them both accordingly, be it face to face or on Teams. But it's something we're very keen to introduce.
Because I think that's something we see it in other walks of things, whether it's apprenticeship levies from large companies, they can have some room to share that with the smaller companies who aren't paying apprenticeship levy. Whether we can explore with stakeholders, say, is there a way that the larger players are able to provide a platform that the smaller ones can collectively join in with, I think would be quite an interesting avenue to explore maybe. But I guess that, Joe, when you're in the lab, and Yoko, you similarly, when you go to your scientific colleagues and say, we think we should change to a different plastic supplier, or the packaging isn't going to be single use because they're going to recycle polystyrene boxes or something. I mean, my experience, and again, it's a long time since I was in the lab, but even talking to scientists, is this sort of almost superstition around, well, I'm not changing anything because it's working. How would you respond if, I don't know, someone who normally sends you a restriction enzyme in a polystyrene box for thermal controlling is going to say, can we collect your used boxes back in? Would you worry there's going to be contamination across them?
No, I don't think so. I would assume that if they were going to make a change like that, they would have tested that it was an appropriate thing to do. I think I can recognise what one of the other people was saying, that there's been a bit of a culture shift on this issue in recent years and even more in recent months. And I think people are much more open to this issue now than they used to be. Speaking to colleagues in kind of technical services, they say that 10 years ago they tried to make some of these changes and it fell on deaf ears. Whereas now, when we're trying to make some of the same suggestions that they've made, people are much more receptive to it, because I think people have recognised the danger of the climate crisis and the damage that we're doing to the environment, and that people actively want to get involved. So it sometimes requires a little bit of effort to change your habits or do something in a slightly different way. And that requires some people to step forward and be the first one to try new things. But in my experience, people are quite open and willing to do it as long as they're given some information and support in what changes to make.
I think maybe the Luddites, when I was coming through, and I'd include myself in that. But I think there's also that case of, maybe I was just more superstitious back then because you were so pleased something worked once, you didn't want to disrupt anything. I'm not doing that. But maybe it is a generational thing as well. Maybe over time, the new wave coming through and the old fuddy-duddies like myself have moved out of the lab, that it kind of is now a good time for change, perhaps, and there's different pressures. And maybe the fact that, people haven't been traveling so much or haven't had to, but maybe they don't want to go back to traveling, then reducing the carbon footprint is a very good argument with your line management, or with the FD actually would probably want you to reduce traveling, and there's a couple on the line I'm seeing, so I guess they'd be quite happy to pay for less flights. But so I think there, but I'm sort of conscious that we're going through lots of areas, and I hope we'll come back to some of these conversations in more detail. But as a starter point, do you think there's a role for governments in this to incentivize us more to change? I don't know who wants to take that. Yoko, you're nodding your head there, so I'm going to come to you first.
Definitely. I mean, I've been waiting forever to have better incentive for like electric car purchases, more electric car charging points popping up everywhere in the network, and other clean energy things like solar panels and heat exchanger, that sort of thing. I mean, they have to really push that forward, because although like we are actually in a pretty good place, like we are not wealthy, but we can understand what's the science behind it and the necessity. We want to move forward to get into that, but then it's not the small amount of money we have to put forward to do that as either. So giving the incentive for like a group of us to just push forward, to get started, the ball rolling, I think is a really good thing to do.
Joe, what would be anything to add into that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's really important for the government to make smart policies that address some of these issues and to make their communications more clear. I see it almost as a cycle. I think when individuals are passionate and they communicate their desires on this issue, that helps to reinforce to government that it's a popular choice. But then we need the government to make policies to really take the changes scale that's required. So I think we need to see some clearer policies to help facilitate some of the changes that we need. And again, I think also communicating the additional benefits that come with a lot of these changes is really important as well. Instead of framing it as a lot of sacrifices to be made, I think it's really important to emphasize the fact that, you know, switching to electric vehicles would also, you know, make the air cleaner, which would be a massive benefit, as well as addressing the climate crisis. So it's more like opportunities to be had to make the world cleaner and fairer at the same time as addressing the environmental problems.
So I guess, you know, I was working in London at the time the congestion charge came in, and you know, not just the loss of productivity when people who could have been working productively were sat in traffic coming in and out all across London, but it was actually solved very much on the air quality aspect of needing that. And we've kind of seen the impact as we've been discussing here. But I kind of think now, you know, with all the discussion around whether people should go back, really the office-based labs are different. You can't just set them up at home. But for office-based, where there's this debate about hybrid working and 3 days in the office and 2 out, we're back in 2 days at the moment, but we will increase that the way we function as a team. But the government could actually incentivize companies into that flexible working space. Even if you were saying, well, people were 40% of their time working from home, the reduced traffic you'd see going into town centres would immediately translate through that it's, you know, companies are watching every penny a lot of the time. A lot of these companies in various sectors are right on the breadline, if not below something. So to say then, actually, no, we need you to equip your staff even more to be working from home now that your business is open again. It's actually quite a big challenge. There is a cash flow impediment to it, which the government perhaps could help with, as well as smart policy, because you know, we've seen the inconsistencies of, you know, stay in to stop the spread of it and then go out and eat out and help out because we need everybody back to get the economy open. And we go around these cycles, and it's that sort of degree of consistency that I think would be politically helpful. I don't know, Mina and Neil and Zoe, do you have anything else you'd like to see a government could do?
I think for us moving forward with the electric vehicles, I think Joe mentioned, you know, at the moment we're having to really plan our routes just purely for the charging aspect. And at the moment, policies coming out of the government in regards to electric vehicles are so confusing that, yeah, there's no real clear guidance for us. And, you know, as Neil mentioned earlier, we've got the electric vehicles in London, which is one of the most congested cities. London isn't a small area where we deliver. We have the 6 vehicles that cover it at the moment, but we're having to make sure that we plan them, you know, almost in the minutest detail, purely because of the charging points that are available at the moment. So for us, that's a real big area that we're trying to get our heads around at the moment. When we start implementing it coming into Cambridge, you know, the electric vans coming from our warehouses, they would then need to charge when they get to certain customers or on the way. So it's the work behind it for us has really opened my eyes as to, you know, some of the points needed for us to be able to move forward. And we're a relatively small in comparison to some of the bigger companies that are trying to do this as well. So, yeah. There's a lot of confusion still around electric vehicles and charging. It's
chicken and
points.
egg, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the bit that, you know, when we see from Innovate UK as a funding body or the policy from government generally, it's kind of, we're going to invest and things in greening the economy and building back better. It's almost like, so now we're looking at the energy sector, kind of ignoring how you could help other sectors become more environmentally friendly. So don't exclude them from the discussion. It's not just about new technologies, it's about rolling out the technologies and being smart with what we have, perhaps. And think that we could join dots collectively better, maybe that would be good. Mina, I don't know from a
also
Saviva
the clean investment to the
Mina, do you have anything to add in there?
Yeah, it's something that we obviously are really trying hard to do. Obviously, as traveling people territories with large territories, obviously we have to take a social responsibility in terms of the amount of travel that we do. I mean, with the pandemic, obviously, we've realized that we don't need to be on the road as much as we used to be. Teams meetings are great. You know, we can also use public transport a little bit more. The company have also realized that there isn't a need for cars that aren't electric, because that was always off company car policy. So now obviously they're looking into maybe supplying for the sales staff and the team company cars. And I think we're a long way off in terms of like what we can do as employees on a day-to-day basis. We are that little bit way off, but all of us have realized that now, from working from home a little bit more, we can do a bit more to help to make the world a better place and work with people for climate change.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think I'm going to come back to the panel and conscious of time, just in terms of a kind of a top wish, I guess. But there's a question in the box about ESG and investors and the IPO process. I don't think we couldn't do it justice right now, but we did a session back in June about investments and ESG in life sciences. And what I found really interesting was the number of companies, private companies, not just public. The public ones have to report. Private ones get assessed by investors all the time, often without them even knowing. They just look at the website and they give them a rating. And for quite accidental reasons, sometimes you get a lower or higher reading just because your diversity didn't look rated on your website, or there was no outspoken policy about carbon footprint and what you plan to do about it. So Anya, the short answer is yes, they are looking a lot, and it's factoring in most investment funds. And actually, we have a session tomorrow morning with the Financial Reporting Council talking about what companies need to report, public companies, but also then private companies, what they can measure and who's looking. And so that may be something that also will give you some real insight from Lindsay Lewis from FRC on that. Last few minutes, I'm going to come back to the panel. Just say, we discussed a lot of things that are happening, things that could happen. I think the wider infrastructure about electric vehicle charging points rollout hinder what we could do as a life science sector, and that needs to happen too. But if there was one thing you could pick, if Boris Johnson was sat in front of you right now, what would be the one thing you felt would accelerate this process of us reducing our carbon footprint in life sciences? So I'm going to start with Yoko, because you're top left on my screen, so no other reason other than that.
Oh, I didn't think about the Boris Johnson with that, but for me, the first thing to do is spread the word, educate people, get started with the smallest thing you can possibly do, and then get the ball rolling. But for Boris Johnson, I think invest into green energy and technology sector, create new jobs, train young people and the people who are seeking new jobs, and that will enhance the economy.
Joe.
Yeah, I think my answer would probably be very similar. If you were going to do one thing, I think I would probably say focus on renewable energy at the moment. It's something that doesn't require new technology to be developed. We know how to do it, and it's just a case of accelerating it. And if we're thinking about our own lives or our own organizations, similar to Yoko, I think it's, don't wait around to have a perfectly complete plan. Just pick one good thing you can do and start with that and do it now. And then I think these things have a tendency of building momentum from there. So I think we don't have time left to talk anymore. We have to just get on with it.
But actually, it was interesting because years ago when smart meters for electricity were first talked about, what really delayed everything was the government making a decision on which one they were going to choose to be the standard. Because no infrastructure company was going to invest loads in putting smart meters in unless they knew that was going to be the one of choice. So it delayed it a long way, actually, just not making a decision. Yeah. Neil and Zoe, what would you wish for?
Yeah, I think Yoko has covered it quite clearly, and Joe. It is about investment from the government. I think it's also, I think the younger generation gets it. I think it's a psychology thing, really, is that it's just people overcoming that thought, that those little steps scenario where, is it worth me doing this because somebody there's not doing that? And if everyone forgets that other part of it and starts doing these things, then as the panel said, the momentum will build and it will become the normal. And I think that's an important thing.
Yeah. Thanks, Neil. Mina?
Sorry, I was on mute.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think it will get better. Definitely, I think. Like I said, we're working really hard as an industry to monitor and fix things in the ways that we can, reduce air freight, flights coming out from Sweden, because a lot of our work products are made in Sweden as well. So making sure that it's not just an empty flight coming over with one product, but making sure that that plane is completely packed. And so obviously making, streamlining the processes, I think, making everything a bit more efficient. Making sure that we are, as a company for employees, make sure that we're recycling as much as we can. We've removed any form of paper trail. So people that were used to getting handouts, flyers, handbooks even. So we used to do these wonderful protein purification handbooks and stuff that we've just now stopped doing. So we're reducing our paper waste. And printing profiles, moving to digital, that's a big thing. So for us at the moment, the digital side of the business is growing because we're trying to help in any way we can. Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, I'm left with reasons to be cheerful, because it's only going to build momentum and get better, is what I'm hearing, which is great. I mean, one final question, I'm going to throw this to Joe, I guess, if I may. In terms of where the government could invest now, do you think we kind of need to stop focusing on inventing things necessarily and focus on investing in deploying? Do you think we have the technologies to succeed?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there'll always be a place for new research and innovation, but I feel quite strongly that we can't rely on that being our way out of this. We've got a few years left to solve the problem. We've got plenty of technologies that we're not using to capacity. So I think it's really important that we just get on with doing what we know how to do. That doesn't mean that further down the line there couldn't be something invented that helps us even more, but I don't think that we can afford to do nothing, waiting and assuming that there'll be some magic solution in 5 or 10 years time. So yeah, I think getting on with the things that we already know, and a lot of this isn't even high tech. There's the insulation stuff is in the news at the moment, but that's a complete no-brainer. It would create lots of jobs, it would save people money and lift people out of fuel poverty. So I'm surprised it's become such a controversial subject.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with what they're asking.
Messaging is maybe the controversy, not the message itself. But yeah, there's all of this low-hanging fruit just waiting to be delivered on. So I think, that it's really important to do the things that we already know how to do.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to express my thanks to the panel for sharing your insights and thoughts, and hopefully food for thought for others and everyone else for participating. I'd say I hope it's a conversation we'll return to in one angle or another many times, because I'm leaving with a sense of we must do better, we can do better, and we have the tools to do better, and there is a societal will to do better. So I think with that, collectively, we can achieve an awful lot. And I look forward to reconvening the conversation as we see good practice. From a One Nucleus perspective, we'll be looking to try and promote and disseminate some of the best practice around this. I'm sort of best proud of good practice and things that people could adopt. That it isn't only large companies that can invest in these things. Small companies can make a huge difference. And I think we've got to change that mindset from just because the global issue is so huge, that's not an excuse not to take local action. And I think we need to start grassroots up and go for change. So thank you for your insights and being the early adopters and champions of this. And I'm sure we'll see the fruits of it in time. But for now, everybody, thanks for your time. and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.